Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. I'm happy to see such a loud and raucous lunch crowd. Before we move to today's topic, I just want to make sure that you're aware that next week on Thursday in this room, so Thursday, October 11th, we will have our first Faculty Scholarship Forum presented by Greg Marfleet in the Political Science Department. The title of his talk is The Emergence of Decision, Computational Models of Group Decision Making. So Greg will be very happy to see at least as many people here next week, so please join us if you can. There is still time to join the fall reading group. We've met once, but that doesn't mean you can't come for the final two meetings on accountability in higher education. We have fascinating reading for this next time. We're going to read the spellings report. Okay. You've heard all about it, but now you have a chance to read it and discuss it with your colleagues. Today's speaker, I'm going to call upon Neil Lutsky to introduce. So without further ado, Professor Lutsky.
It's a real pleasure to introduce Milo Schield of Augsburg College today. Milo is one of the most active and articulate advocates of quantitative reasoning in higher education today. He developed and directs the Statistical Literacy Project at Augsburg College, and he serves as Vice President of the National Numeracy Network. Milo has also had a significant impact on the work we're trying to do at Carleton. He's been an inspiration for our efforts, and he's been a tremendous supporter of our efforts. And so I'm both grateful and excited to have Milo here to speak with us today. Milo Schield.
Thank you. I want to start with Carleton. In my humble but expert opinion, Carleton is number one. Carleton is number one, and I see a lot of schools, not only in the US, in the UK, Australia, etc. Carleton is number one in an approach to quantitative literacy, in that a lot of the liberal arts colleges are looking at quantitative literacy, quantitative reasoning, big Q, little q, all sorts of changes. What makes Carleton different is they have anchored their approach on argumentation. This is essential. It's all too easy for the statisticians to come in. I'm a statistician. I belong to the Statistical Association of America, to come in and say, oh yes, we want to do quantitative reasoning across the curriculum. And all of a sudden, the program is talking about the birthday problem. Do you believe that with the group of people we have here, there's better than a 50-50 chance that two of you have the same birthday? You say, well, gee, there's 365 days in a year. There's only 30 or 40 of us. Is that true? And statisticians just get into ecstasy, I guess, and so forth. And for a statistician, that's statistics in context. And you're a history major or an English major, and you're saying, this isn't exactly what I had in mind. Numbers in context. And I've really come to realize that we can all get behind the same phrase and yet have totally different meanings for it. A math stat person can think about what are the interesting math stat things that I can find a home for, a context for, such as the birthday problem. And you say, I've lived my whole life and I've never encountered the birthday problem in doing anything. A person in liberal arts would say, let's look at the context and have the context drive the numbers we need. And if we don't need them, we'll let somebody else deal with it. Back to my point, Carleton is number one. They are the only school that I know of that has specifically anchored their approach to quantitative literacy on argumentation, on context. Let's go out and see what students are doing first. And then let's decide what we need. So I think that's a real tribute, and that's why I'm proud to be here. You people are on the cutting edge, as far as I'm concerned, of the real future. I mean, there are a lot of false futures about little ways to do things and simulation and so forth that the statistical math people get enamored with. But what you're doing is fundamental. So, I wanted to start there and get that out of the way. The second thing is the W.M. Keck Foundation. I'm at Augsburg, which isn't quite the same league as Carleton. In fact, when my son asked what college he ought to go to, I said Carleton's a good choice, so he's a Carleton graduate. Here we are competing for the W.M. Keck projects that come out, and Augsburg isn't in the same league. And yet, we ended up competing for two things on the liberal arts. We got a W.M. Keck statistical literacy project to try and come up with a new discipline, statistical literacy, where the focus would be on literacy and not just statistics. And we were successful, and I was feeling very proud, you know, how you can be. And suddenly I had this vision of all these people sitting around the Keck group deciding what proposals to fund. And they looked at the Augsburg proposal. They said, Augsburg, small school, comprehensive college. We'd really rather have Carleton. We'd really rather have this and this and this. But everybody on that committee had taken statistics. Everybody on the committee thought it was the worst course they ever had in their undergraduate education. And everyone had taken a vow in the secrecy of their heart to throw money at anybody. So we ended up getting the project, and we made some strides. I'll get to that at the end. What I want to do is to start talking about quantitative literacy. And, oops, back up. We all agree on the bottom, there's an interdisciplinary need for quantitative literacy. Books written on it, Linsky and from St. Olaf. At the top, we're all interested in how could quantitative literacy be a graduation skill? How can it tie in closely with the school mission? The problem's in the middle. And, well, let's do two more things. We want to have faculty support. Without faculty support, nothing lives. And it's got to be accessible. I mean, there are all these great things you can talk about. I teach critical thinking. And it's really hard to assess critical thinking in some ways as a course. Maybe that's why it hasn't been successful. The problem is in the middle. What are the concepts, the principles that are going to identify this? And I have two criteria for them. They've got to be readily understandable by liberal arts majors. I'm not talking about calculus, multivariate analysis, etc. Readily understandable. And they've got to be readily teachable by any faculty member. Now that's a high bar, but I think that's what it's going to take to make this succeed if it's really going to be across the curriculum and have legs. And to tighten up on this, we've got to have some core concepts, because quantitative literacy is just kind of a loose word. It's got to be argument-based. Carleton is already on first base, clearly on first base with that. Mathematically sound, or otherwise the mathematicians tear you apart, but you've got experts like accountants and so forth that can help you on that. Understandable by students and faculty. Whatever we're going to call this, people got to look at it and say, yeah, that fits. That's not a big stretch. It's got to be useful to students. That's the biggest problem we're having in statistics. We've done studies of students before and after they take their intro stat course. They see less value in statistics after taking the course than they do before. We've run this. The first study was on 1,500 students, something like 15 different classrooms, teachers, etc. All of them. It was too big. We couldn't say something about statistical insignificance. It's been done at 2 other campuses the same way. And the statisticians are beginning to pay attention to this. So I hold that as a bar. The students must see it as valuable immediately, not 10 years later. And third, it's got to be teachable. If not teachable, at least reinforceable. The same way that I would expect anybody in the faculty to handle grammar issues. I'm not teaching grammar, but it should be at that level we all, hey, I can handle this. So, here are my ideas on 4 math tools that take into account context. Context, that's what we're about in the liberal arts, and that are all English or graph based. I love algebra, I think algebra, but none of my students speak algebra, okay? So it's got to be done without algebra. Number one, arithmetic comparisons. Percent more. It's not a big deal, but it can be a big deal. I was interested in Neil's results of looking at the student writing here at Carleton. Cases where they could have used it and didn't, cases where they should have used it and didn't. I'm thinking just being able to make a simple comparison. They've got to be able to do that. And this is a little trickier than I think faculty oftentimes think. We'll get to that. Number two, they should be able to handle ratios, rates, percentages, chance, in ordinary English. And we'll get to that. You say, well, yeah, I'd expect my students to be able to read a graph or a table. They should be able to make a comparison of rates or percentages. Say that this is bigger than this is 2 times bigger than this is more likely than this is more prevalent than this. We're staying with ordinary English. And the fourth item, which the people in the math departments don't get to until they hit multivariate calculus. It's their 3rd semester of calculus. And the people in statistics don't get to until their 2nd semester of statistics, multivariate analysis. I think we need this at the intro level without all the math, so that we can talk about how do you standardize things that are different. How do you compare Carleton with Augsburg, where Augsburg has a much higher percentage of first-generation students than Carleton? Okay? How would you do these comparisons? Say we're doing education scores and we're comparing different states and they have a different percentage of minority or low-income students. How do you take things into account? Everybody in statistics knows about this, but it's not taught in any intro course because the math is too hard. We use a graphic technique that art majors and music majors can go right through, talk about, it's no problem. It just got written up in the cover of Stats magazine called Beware the Lurking Variable, publication of the American Statistical Association. Brand new technique that we're using it on. Well, let's take a look at these 4 items, and that's really my talk, just these 4 items. Rather than be qualitative and say Napoleon was short or shorter than many French soldiers, saying he was 4 inches shorter. That's what we want students to do and to feel comfortable with. Now, I'm sure Carleton students are a long way past this. Or that women live longer than men. No, they live about 7 years longer than men. Now, as men are smoking less, this is decreasing and so forth. Now let's get into the harder part. Interest rates, say they go from 1 to 2%. A student should be able to say they double. Got it. They're 2 times as much. No problem. It's 100% increase. Well, there's going to be a problem because most students would say that was a 1% increase. But it doubled. It doubled. It went up by itself again. And they say, well, there's 1 in here someplace. What is it? It's a 1 percentage point increase. Not rocket science. This is ordinary English, but students should know its difference. Okay? Here we are, Kelvin and Hobbes. One has 1 water balloon, the other has 3. Hobbes says, I see the fear, Kelvin says, I see the fear in your eyes, I can get you 3 times wetter. Wrong. I can get you 3 times as wet. I can get you 200% wetter because you have 2 balloons more than I have. I can get you 2 times wetter, but not 3. Now, I'm not going to die on this hill, okay? This is a cartoon, for God's sake. Here I am as a statistician tearing it apart, you know. But still, students should be aware of these things. Just how do we use ordinary English to make comparisons of numbers? Not a big topic. It's not going to take hours to do this, but they need to be exposed to it. Yes, 3 is 2 times more than 1. 200% more than 1. 3 times as much as 1. Students need to be aware that small changes in syntax can have big changes in semantics. How's that for a takeaway line? Yes. Number two. Number one was just comparing numbers. Number two is they should be able to handle rates and percentages. Could we have the first two things being true of the same group of people, the same time, the same place? The Star and Tribune says unemployment is up. The Pioneer Press says unemployment is down. Could they both be true at the same time for the same group, the same place? Yes. Why? There's an ambiguity here. There's something unstated, and a student should be able to recognize that. That all we're doing here is talking about the variable element. We don't know what we're talking about underneath. We could say, yes, it's up because the number of unemployed is up as compared with 1950. There's a lot more people now than there were in 1950. It's down because the rate is down. And you should be able to see that when a student says unemployment is up or down, you say that's ambiguous. You need to be more specific. You don't want to write an ambiguous statement, okay? That's what we're asking for. On the bottom, are these two percentages the same? The percentage of men who are runners, or the percentage of men among runners? Well, we all know English. You can throw it around and say the same thing a lot of ways. Our question is whether they mean the same thing. You might say, I don't think they mean the same thing, but where are our students taught it? Now, you may reply, nobody ever taught me that. All I know is there are a lot of students out there that don't realize these are two different statements. And especially when you hit foreign students for whom English is a second language, they're saying, come on, give us a break, give us some rules, give us some description, etc. So, this is the second item. They should be able to read a table. Take a close look at this table for a minute and look at the four statements underneath. All of the statements involve the circled 33%. All of the statements involve the row, smoker, the column, runner, and the title, female. Can they all be right? I'll tell you right now, no they can't. Okay? They all say different things. Number 1, 2, 3, and 4. Ready? We're going to have a little show of hands. I mean, this is not rocket science, people. That's my point. This is my take-home point right here. Okay? And so just look at it and figure which one or ones would you hold up your hand on. Number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. Ready? How many for number 1? I don't see any hand. Number 2. I don't see any hand. Number 3. I see a third, a little shy of a half. Number 4. And then by subtraction, I could say about a fourth of the group is saying, we're not right sure on that. And I think that's what's academically respectable. When you don't know, you just say, hey, I don't know. This isn't my field. My point is, this is not a rocket science field. And I would say number 3 is the correct answer. And you'd say, well, what tells you that? Is this something you just kind of psychically know? 2 things. In the title, the percentage who are female. The relative clause in English identifies the part, the random element. The second element is a mathematical one. The edges, the margins are averages, not sums. And so my students spend a lot of time reading tables and then writing out sentences in ordinary English. We have an online program that reads ordinary English and gives them feedback, etc. We spend a bunch of money on that. But students find it real helpful. That's the goal of this exercise. Number 3, correct. Let's try this one. Students can go down to Snyder's and buy an HIV test. You might want to check out your partner before you go to the next step. Students get kind of bug-eyed when we go into this thing, and you're looking at this test, 99.9% accurate, the upper left-hand corner. And let's suppose that you and your future partner are standing at this phone booth and you just called in with your secret code number and a voice on the other end says positive. And your partner's saying, or your would-be partner's saying, goodbye, it's been real. And you're looking at this box saying, but I could be 1 in 1,000. What does this mean? And I've got 2 things written over top of it in the bottom there. That 99.9% of the people that test positive have the disease. Is that what this 99.9% accuracy means? Or is it the bottom one? That 99.9% of the people that are diseased test positive. These are 2 totally different things. Which one are students supposed to be interested in? Which one is the one that we're interested in? Go for it.
Bottom one.
The bottom one, because
Because you want to know how accurately the people who have the disease are being indicated by the test.
and that's true for the makers of the test. That's the one they're interested in, so they will give the test to a group of people that have the disease, and they would like for that test to confirm 100% of the known cases. You're absolutely right for the people that make the test. But my question was for the students. They're not making tests. They don't know if they have the disease. So which one are they going to be interested in?
First
The first
They
one.
can actually be interested in both.
At this point in their life, I'll just stay with the person. All they know is they've tested positive. And they're saying no test is 100% perfect. What's the chance I have the disease? And for a student body like Carleton, when they work through the math, the chance they have the disease is well shy of 50%. Well shy of 50%. And you say, whoa, isn't that mislabeling? No, accuracy is an incomplete statement. We're into prevarication here. You don't lie with statistics, you prevaricate, you tell half-truths, okay? And students need to be able to spot this. Item 3, comparing ratios. Supposing you got a job for the government and they're saying, you know, we need to crack down on marijuana. And you're saying, God, of all the things in our society, why do we have to take on marijuana? And they say, well, it's your job. And they say, give me a better reason. 90% of heroin addicts first use marijuana. You say, well, I guess it's a reason. And then all of a sudden you're talking with a colleague and they say, do you realize heroin addicts first use milk? And you're going, wait a minute. If 90% is a good number, 99% ought to be a bigger number, a better number. And yet it isn't. It isn't. This is where a simple percentage doesn't have the power, and students need to realize that just because you say 90% of the accidents in the military involve men, doesn't mean the military is screwing up on how they handle men. It just means most of the people there are men, right? Okay. So, do you realize that men are psychologically stronger than women? You're saying, I've never heard any argument for that. What's your basis? Well, it's a little extreme, but widows, women that have lost their spouse, are more likely among suicides than widowers. They just can't handle the loneliness, can't find the refrigerator, don't know how to fix the meals, etc., without the man around. You're saying, you've got this backward, this doesn't fit. Well, maybe this is what you're thinking of. Widows are less likely to commit suicide than widowers. Now, there's just been a slight change in the grammar from among to to with a few things. But among is the group in the first case, and the reason that's true, there's just a lot more women that survive. The good die young, the men, okay? That's why that one, maybe that was not a statistical statement. But the second one is the one we're interested in. How many of our students can appreciate the difference between these two statements? I'm talking about ordinary English. That's where I think we need to stay focused. Okay, and the fourth one, I think I'm going to have to skip over that one. I got started here a little late. This is on the web, and you can take a look at that. What I'd like to do is just jumped what we need to do in conclusion, and then I want to go to a second topic here, we need to agree on some core ideas. Otherwise, we're just talking about quantitative literacy in the abstract. And we don't build curriculums around just critical thinking or something like that. What do you mean when you say critical thinking? What topics are there going to be? We need to have it be something that goes across the curriculum. We can expect it of all of our students, just like writing. This is why I love your paradigm so much. It's got to focus on arguments. You're already ahead of the game. You're the leader in that respect. It's got to relate to context. It's got to enhance their critical thinking. But what are these core ideas going to be? Most of these ideas are below the radar for people in math or stat department. Percentage change? This isn't exactly a college level topic. But when you hit percentage points and a few things like that, they haven't had it before. So what I'd like to do is to talk about what we've done at Augsburg under the Statistical Literacy Project. The National Numeracy Network is interested in numeracy across the curriculum. There are a lot of ways to do it. One is to infuse it into a number of courses. What we've done at Augsburg is to say we need a core course that sets a standard so that people across the curriculum know what the students are going to have. And it just happens to be based off these same items that you just saw. Okay? And what I'm going to have my colleague Mark Isaacson hand out is an overview of this course, and it's available on the web, as is this handout. So, this PowerPoint presentation. So I'll just go back to the you go out to this website, statlit.org/PDF. 2007 Schield, Carleton, 6-up. There's a 6-up presentation of the slides that you have today. And you can get the whole thing. What I'd like to do is to talk about, you may have to look on it. I didn't expect this big of a crowd, a rainy day, numbers, etc. It's like, well, the food must be good. Okay. And I'm looking here on the right. This is an English and graph-based course. There is algebra because I'd say 1/3 of my students prefer algebra. We're not talking algebra 2 here, or even calculus. But it's like, hey, I can do it with algebra, and I certainly don't want to take algebra away from anybody. So everything is taught so that the student can either do it with words and graph or do it algebraically. And on the far left, we've run the course so that it focuses on news stories. I agree that news stories are not a great place to start with. If I'm teaching in sociology, psychology, where students are going on to grad school, I'd probably start the course with studies. Government studies of things. They're a little more rigorous. They've had more care. But my students are art majors and music majors. They're not going on to graduate school in anything quantitative, okay? And so we study news stories. Teachers' gender affects learning, okay? What do we have? Smoking lessens IQ. Well, is this a before-after study that before I started smoking my IQ was higher, and then after I started smoking my IQ went down, and then when I quit my IQ went up? Probably not. What they did is probably compare smokers and non-smokers. And leaving aside IQ, is, whatever we're going to do the same with both. You say, well, there's other differences between smokers and non-smokers. How do you take these things into account? And that's where students need to be aware of context. And so I typically walk into class with something I just got off the web that day. So the stories are fresh, but the ideas, we have a pattern for. The students need just a pattern. Because in the end, what I'd like to do is just tell them to comment. Flipping to the other side, in the upper left, these are 2 books that I highly recommend for somebody that wants to get into this area. Joel Best wrote Damn Lies in Statistics, More Damn Lies in Statistics. And he's been here to Carleton to talk to your group. What Joel emphasized and what I didn't see was how important context was in deciding what to count and how to measure. That The best way to rig an argument is to set the premises, right? Or to set the definitions. So if I want to show that bullying is a big problem in middle school, all I have to do is redefine bullying from there has to be blood and a doctor's certificate on it to peer pressure, malicious rumors, and suddenly I've got 120% of my students involved in bullying, right? By changing the definition. And that's not something you typically spend any time on in a stat or math course. You take the categories as given. Whereas we're talking about letting the context determine the math. We say, look at the definitions. What's the easiest way they could have just jiggled the question slightly? Or just jiggled the definition of the group involved. If I want to have the average income be low, I can include seniors all the way down to 16-year-olds. If I want to have average income be up, I'll talk about working adults, right? Just a little change and the numbers jump. The numbers are the tail. It's the choices that are the dog in this case. So the students start with Joel Best's book, and they do a number of exercises with numeric answers, but then they spend time with non-numeric answers. Which definition gives the larger count? Heat wave deaths as being deaths caused by a heat wave, or deaths occurring during a heat wave? You immediately say, oh, it's going to be the latter. Which one's easier to count? The latter. Which one gives you the bigger number? The latter. Which one is the one you're going to see in the newspaper probably? It's going to be the latter. In fact, I heard a story talking about a guy who was a newspaper reporter up in Wisconsin, and he always tabulated the number of accidents on snow days. And then one day he thought, I wonder how many accidents there are on non-snow days. It wasn't appreciably different. It wasn't different. It may have been more dangerous, but we take more care on snow days. Okay. Moving down to, well, we talked about bullying here. We've got a program. Basically what we're doing is asking students to think hypothetically. A typical math problem has all the information given to solve the problem inside the problem. What we're talking about are problems where the information is not given. And the student needs to think hypothetically, well, what would have happened if they had defined bullying this way? Could that explain the high number they got? And this school only got 1% bullying. How did they define bullying? Oh, you have to have a coroner's report. Well, okay. You got the idea. It's a different focus for a course. It's a critical thinking focus, and oftentimes math stat people with right, wrong, deductive thinking and that kind of questions on tests are not comfortable teaching this. It's the people from communications and the liberal arts that are comfortable teaching it. We do it all the time, but we don't want to do math. We've got our own field of interest. So this thing is falling between the stools on which academic disciplines perch. That's Joel Best's phrase. And that's a problem for this discipline, is to get a toehold where it can fit in and be a viable part of the enterprise. On the far right is the way that our students approach news articles. I don't know about you, but I have trouble remembering too many things. I've taken a lot of courses, and a semester later, I can hardly remember what I did. It's, well, we did something with newspaper stories, okay? And I thought, if I'm ever going to design a course, it's going to be really simple so that maybe I could remember, because I wasn't a very good student in college. I had a great time, but anyway. It starts with critical thinking. They should be able to read a news story and identify what's the point of the story. That's basic. If you can't do that, why are you in college? But I have problems with some of my students. They can't see what the point of the story is. Oftentimes the story will talk about some facts a lot, and they'll say, well, that's the point. No, the point is something disputable, typically, that you need an argument to support. Argument? I don't see argument. Okay. Secondly, does the argument involve a causal connection? When we say that teachers' gender affects education, did we mean there was an association? Or were we saying that's a causal factor and you can expect to change students' education by changing the gender of their professor? Students are totally unaware of this distinction. They never see it in math. Math leaves out causation. That's material. Math is formal. And they typically don't see numbers involved on the liberal arts side. We've got them right in the middle. It's a witch's brew of words and numbers, and they're not familiar with this. We then take them through 4 questions. And the admonition is take care. Not only for life, but when you're dealing with statistics and words. You really want to take care. And each of the letters stands for something. The C stands for context. Confounded. What you take into account matters. So the story I skipped over, the difference in earnings between white and black families in the U.S., about $25,000. Average family earnings. And you say, this is a problem. But if you take into account family structure, whites are much more likely to be headed by a married couple than blacks. Married couples certainly have the potential for higher earnings because you've got 2 breadwinners. I mean, that's just simple math. When you take that into account, 60% of that difference goes away. That's what we're talking about here in context. What did you take into account or fail to take into account when you came up with your numbers? That's the C in take care. The A is assembly. That's Joel Best's point. Sorry if I lisp, I've got new braces. I'm just getting a question to them. Assembly. How were things defined? How were they presented? How were they shown as a graph? All of these things can influence the perception of the person reading the thing. This is a big item. In fact, these first 2 items are basically about 80% of our course. That's where we spend most of our time. The last 2 items, randomness or chance, the stuff you get in your statistics course, a little bit on that because they need to know about margin of error in polls, especially sample size, that sort of thing. But most of the news stories don't revolve around margin of error, statistical significance, or sample size. And the last one, very important, error or bias. How by picking the sample, asking the question, you can influence the answers. So, I'd like to wrap up my part with just the conclusion. Number 1, Carleton is at the forefront. You really are, and this isn't just gratuitous. It's like, no, Carleton, there's no other school I know of that has focused their quantitative thinking on argument. Which to me means you're in a really good position to say, well, now, how are we going to change our students institutionally? Are we going to, what things do we want them to know? And I think that would be a great topic. I know faculty spend a lot of time on it, but I'm tossing my oar in for a few basic things that I think all students should know across the curriculum. And then how are we going to educate our students on that? So I look forward to hearing about your discussion. Thank you, Neil. And then I'd like to see if there are questions or comments on this topic. Sing for yourself. I'm here to see what you people think. Going once? Yes, sir.
So, I know when I read the newspaper, what I generally walk away from is I can never draw much of a conclusion at all, because either the information is incorrect or at least incomplete. How do you keep the students positive and wanting to do something as
I
opposed
think
to
that's a really
disengaging?
important question, because to take our students and turn them into nihilist people that just, you can't trust anything, that's not where we want them to end up. And that was the problem I had when I started in this business, because it's really easy to say, well, this is wrong, and this is wrong, and this is wrong. And you come away as a naysayer, and what you've taught them is you don't trust anything. Where I've tried to focus the course is what makes this stronger or weaker than other studies. It's a comparison. It's like comparing the causes of the French and the American Revolution. It's like one is absolutely good and one is bad. What are the things that make this stronger given what they were trying to do? There are some things you can't run an experiment on. I can't randomly assign students to be smokers or non-smokers or to have unprotected sex or something. I can't do a full-fledged gold standard randomized clinical trial. And so given what I'm looking at, the fact that this is an observational study is the best that can be done. Now given that, how well did they do in making the best study that could be done? So I think you're right. you really need to figure out a way for students to see, this is better. This is pretty good. Given the limits of what we're studying, you may not be able to do any better. It doesn't prove it in a knockdown, drag-out fashion, but this is pretty good. And sometimes the results surprise us in these pretty good studies. Good question, good question. Yes?
I think what you're proposing here is really a piece of rhetorical analysis. Do you also have your students thinking about audience purpose, some of the other features of rhetorical analysis?
And if it were that kind of persuasion class, that's where you would go. I've really limited the focus of this narrowly to reading. Reading and writing. Just writing the claims, writing the statements. That once they hit another class, such as a rhetoric persuasion class, then they can think on audience, etc. We have a quantitative journalism class at Augsburg, and that's what they focus on too. But I found there's so much material that needs to be covered, and students need time to absorb it, that I haven't taken that one on. But that's certainly something that somebody else doing it differently might choose to include, because it's big. It's big. Good question. Yes?
I have a couple of questions. How long have you been doing this course? Have you done some assessment? You know, is it working? Are the students learning what you want them to
Well, you
learn?
never ask the designer if it's working. Although I'm pretty critical on it. I'm in a business department, and it's like, if it isn't really working, I want to be the first to know about it. And I've tried a lot of things that I thought would work, and I just looked at it and I said, it's not working. It's just, we got to do it differently. It's been taught at Augsburg since 1998. And we've had probably 12 faculty from different disciplines coming through, evaluating it, writing up comments. Well, I think you ought to do more of this, etc. It's being taught by, Mark here has taught it as an online course through Capella, and we've got another colleague that's teaching it right now. And we've been working on online exercises, because oftentimes the exercises are what get people tied up. So now all of our exercises are in Moodle for the right, wrong answers, that type of thing, so the students can work on that. So we have more class time to spend on the softer critical thinking parts. So we're trying to put together a whole package, and then talking to other colleges. Well, maybe you'd like to try this out and see how it works for you. At least it's a start. You know, we've got a textbook where we've been working at it for a while. It gives you something to work with, and hey, once you got a textbook, you pick and choose and do what you want anyway. So, you said other questions, or was that the main one?
Well, yeah. Well, again, just in strict assessment, so when students come in, do you find out some baseline information on what their statistical literacy is, and then can you measure some kind of growth over time?
And that's the way I used to measure improvement, content-based improvement. And based on what I said, I've really changed my mind on that. I'll go for attitude. I don't figure they're going to remember half of what I teach them anyway, even if I'm really a great teacher. But if they have a positive attitude toward it, they're more likely to come back and use it when they need it, rather than just blow it off and say, if it has statistics in it, I don't want to know about it. So I go for attitude. So at the end, they're asked a couple of questions. Did this course improve your critical thinking skills? Do you see using this in your everyday life? These are throwaway questions that are worthless. The last question. Should this course be required of all students for graduation? Now, I'm giving this to music majors, art majors that came in praying into this quantitative course. Just help me get through this one course, right? And it's a 5-point scale. Strongly agree, agree, neutral, disagree, strongly disagree. 20% strongly agree, 30% agree, 50% neutral. That's what I look for, is just the students see value in it. They'll tell other students, you should take that course. I get a number of pre-law students that have gotten the word, this is the kind of course you want to take when you're studying for the LSAT. It's a critical thinking course, etc. So that's the kind of thing. I do the other. I do before and after things on tables and so forth. But I've really shifted to attitude as being what I want to go for. It centers the course differently than content. It keeps me kind of focused on what students see as valuable, rather than what Milo thinks is really, the birthday problem is a really great item. Yes, sir.
It seems that another kind of assessment based on the goals you stated for the course a while ago would be the question, do you see your colleagues in other departments increasing the quantitative content in their courses because they know that students have certain basic skill backgrounds?
That would be lovely. And institutionally, I think something like Carleton could pull it off. At Augsburg, this course is one of 20 different courses that a student can take to satisfy their quantitative reasoning requirement for graduation. So that if I'm teaching history, I don't know whether any of the students in my class have had this background. But the minute it became an institutional core, and teachers said, I can count on this and this and this, then it's a different ballgame. And that's why I think picking those core concepts is so critical. Last question, and then we'll close it up here. Yes, sir.
I just comment. I wonder whether you talk this from the angle of politics. I can see the so-called democracy is statistics with 90%, 50% vote for one person, and this person becomes president. And I also from your talk, I can see the dictatorship. A group of people control the number and manipulate the number, and terrify the media and the people to believe their numbers. So I can see this number can be very dangerous too. But the quantitative literacy may be a way to fight against this dictatorship.
Lynn Steen wrote a book and argued that point, that this quantitative literacy was essential for a modern democracy to survive. That whoever runs the numbers, forms the numbers, presents the numbers, is in control. It's a different kind of control than just wealth or political power, but it's power. Why don't we close it off here, and you can ask questions afterward. Thank you.